Hello and welcome to Media7. I'm Russell Brown. In this show, we'll look at the return of an important report on New Zealand media ownership and what it signifies. But first, timing is everything, and Yasmin Ryan's was spot on. The New Zealand reporter landed the job with Al Jazeera in Doha just as the events of the Arab Spring were beginning. Sarah Daniels spoke to her while she was back home last week.
It began here, in Tunisia, in December last year. The Arab Spring ended 23 years of President Ben Ali's rule, and it started a wave of pro-democracy protests across the Arab world, from the Gulf to North Africa. As the world watched, so did New Zealand journalist Yasmin Ryan.
I was following the uprising from Doha in December, so at that point, obviously we couldn't get journalists into Tunisia. We did have one journalist working undercover, but most of us were following it from Doha on Twitter and on the social media. There's been huge growth in our website, in our web traffic, really since January. We saw first of all with Tunisia, I think it jumped about 60% or something like that, because other media, just English-speaking media, hadn't been reporting on it, and we had been following it really since mid-December. So suddenly when everyone was like, what's happened in Tunisia, they came to us. And then the same in Egypt, people really realised that their media were failing, so suddenly we had huge traffic through Egypt. Also, a lot of people were watching Al Jazeera, the live stream of the television, because in a lot of countries you still can't get Al Jazeera, and because we had live streams going from Tahrir Square and things like that, people wanted to watch the revolution, the uprising, as it happened. So that's been really good for our website.
Social media was the driving force behind the revolution, and it triggered a kind of revolution of its own.
Social media was really fundamental to our reporting, because up until Ben Ali left, we couldn't be on the ground in Tunisia. It really changed the way that I do journalism, because since then, and in terms of being part of the communities, even when you have an article, suddenly you've got the people on the ground who are interacting with the article, sharing it. A lot of my articles now, there's a community that will translate it into French and Arabic, so that Tunisians themselves can see the journalism. So it's really interesting in terms of the way journalism is being done, and obviously activism. Hugely, it wouldn't have happened without Facebook, and not that I think it should be called the Facebook revolution or the Al Jazeera revolution or Wikipedia revolution, but all of those factors are still significant, and if all of those layers weren't there, it wouldn't have really happened to the extent that it did.
So you studied French in France. How useful has it been to be fluent in French?
Well, yeah, in North Africa, French is a very widely spoken language, so it means I can go most places in Tunisia, even in the very rural areas, and speak to people. So it's been very useful. I wouldn't be able to report without it.
How's it being a female correspondent over there?
I really didn't. In Tunisia, I mean, it's a pretty equal society, and relatively speaking, women are very active in all spheres of life, and also the people are so desperate to tell their stories that they don't see you as a woman, they see you as a journalist.
Do you have to wear anything in particular when you're reporting in Tunisia, for instance?
I wear the similar clothes to what I wear in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it depends where you're reporting from. Obviously, if you're in Pakistan or Afghanistan, in tribal areas or in very conservative societies, you would probably have to wear at least a hijab. But in Tunisia, I mean, a lot of Tunisian women don't wear hijab. There's a huge variety of whether some people are more liberal, some people are more conservative, so it's quite acceptable.
Her next assignment is covering the Tunisia election.
There's a lot of uncertainty, so it's going to be interesting. We're going to be mainly in Tunis. I think we're going to go back to places like Sidi Bouzid, Kasserine, where the uprising began, to see what's happening in those areas and if they're finally having their voices heard.
Ostensibly, it's going to be a democratic situation. Do you think that women will have more power and more voice?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of issues around gender that are really coming out now. And there's a huge fear amongst women because Tunisia is such a liberal society, and actually Ben Ali and Bourguiba, the former president, really pushed women's rights right from the beginning. He took power in '55. Within 6 months before he introduced the constitution or anything, he made a special code to protect women's rights. The right to initiate divorce, property rights, co-ed education, abortion. Tunisia had abortion rights before most European countries, so it's really quite progressive, and that's not feminism that's come from the West. That's really a Tunisian brand of feminism. So people, there's a lot of fears that they're going to lose that because there is a rise in conservatism, especially in rural areas. But the thing that women really pushed for early on was a law on gender parity, which is really quite groundbreaking, and especially in the Arab world, it's unheard of. So that on all the lists, they have kind of an MMP system like we have in New Zealand. That's what they've introduced for the selection coming up. And on all the lists, it's not only is it 50-50, so they must have 50% of their candidates women, but it must be layered. So if the first candidate on the list is a man, the next one must be a woman. So basically it's going to be 50-50, so that really ensures women will have a voice.
What next for you? Will you continue working for Al Jazeera for some time?
Yes, I think Al Jazeera is a very good place to be right now, geographically where it is in the world, but also in terms of the resources we get to do the type of journalism. As a web journalist, being able to be sent as a correspondent and to do in-depth feature pieces is amazing. And I think a lot of other places in the world, and including in New Zealand, there's a lot of budget cutting in the newsroom going on, and that must be very difficult for journalists to try and do their job when they have time constraints, budget constraints, and space, and also the commercial restraints. We don't have to worry, on our website we don't have advertising, so that's not something that we have to worry about. And really, if you look at what's happening in the Arab world and the role that media has played, it should be a reminder to people that of just what media can do and the power of media. So so I will stay with Al Jazeera for those reasons, and I hope that people elsewhere, the other newsrooms, maybe they'll stop thinking of just the commercial rationale and maybe of the importance of journalism as a public good.
Al Jazeera's Yasmin Ryan talking to Sarah Daniel there, and something to chew on for after the break when we look at media ownership and its implications.